Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Here we are once again with the great Imaduddin al-Wāsiṭī rahimallahu ta'ala, Ahmad ibn Ibrahim radiyallahu anhu, and his rihla. And if you were with us in the last session, you may remember that we were journeying with him to Baghdad to sit with and learn from the jurists of the region. And while doing that, we discovered a scholarly community that was rather developed. I would say very developed in comparison to what he was accustomed to in Wāsiṭ, in the marshlands. If you remember, that was one of the main elements that garnered complaint from him, is that his people in Wāsiṭ, we would say the country folk, were not well educated in the sciences of Islam, and on top of that, they didn't even like the fuqaha. So it wasn't a matter of we want to learn, but we don't have access. It was, we don't even want to hear from these people, let alone learn from them. And they only relied upon them when it came to issues of nikah, when you had to do a contract for marriage or otherwise. So when he arrives in Baghdad, compliments the group, notices the virtue and the knowledge that they possess, and he essentially begins to embark upon a journey of learning the Shafi'i madhab. And you may remember that it was during, or is in that region, that he was introduced to the legacy of Imam al-Razi, Ibn al-Khatib, rahimahullah, the great Imam al-Mutakallimin. Okay? And his entire corpus, if you will, and framework is what the scholars of that region were entrenched in. And so he notes, of course, that they lacked in certain areas, though they were much better than the previous group. They lacked in other areas, namely the spiritual sciences. And so, as a result, you would find them involved in certain things: backbiting, vying for position, becoming jealous. If someone sat above them in an authority of teaching or disseminating knowledge, etc., being appointed above another one, to the point, he said, they would lose their appetite. And this is a symptom. To have these illnesses of the heart is a symptom that's manifesting because internally you're misaligned and misdirected. Because what's happened is people are embarking upon these pathways through the study and mastery of fiqh and the various different related subjects. Some of them more engaged in usul al-fiqh, mainly because of what they would perceive to be the outcome of rank. And that is the illusion of greatness. When you begin to think that you're special and you deserve some type of preferential treatment, rank, and acknowledgement. And outwardly, there's a fine line between when a person is coveting that and their intention is based on that, versus someone who is sincerely embarking upon these studies and dissemination of knowledge for the sake of Allah, and then Allah bestows that upon them. He bestows upon them a rank and an acceptance of people. وَمَا تَوْفِيقِي إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. And that's basically what it comes down to. My success is only by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when he finishes his stay with them, this is where we pick up in the next chapter of the Rihla. And this is where he says, and we're going to read directly from the book itself. It says, then I departed from them, meaning the fuqaha, and entered the company of the devout Baghdadis and their fuqara. So we're going from al-fuqaha to al-fuqara. The fuqara are what we're translating as spiritually poor or impoverished. Okay? I found them better than the former group by 1,000 degrees, meaning the people in Wāsiṭ. They forbade what is unlawful, permitted what is lawful, and adhered to most of the legal teachings of the jurists. Yet, they were a people distinguished by woolen cloaks, patched garments, and robes covered with ornamental patches. Their greatest concerns, however, revolved around worldly pleasures: fine food, elegant dress, well-tailored clothing, keeping company of the wealthy, cultivating their friendship, socializing freely with them, showing them excessive humility, joking with them, and seeking their companionship and generosity. Most of their daytime conversation consisted of light-hearted banter, witty anecdotes, singing, reciting poetry, and delighting in it. When they danced, their movements were graceful and carefully synchronized to the music, lifting one foot while setting down the other, bending over and springing upward from that bent posture as though bowing. You might recognize this in some like Sufi circles. It's very orchestrated. The dancing and the movements where they're all in unison, very careful. He's describing similar to this. It's very careful. They step, they bend, and they spring upwards, and they're all doing it together. You can go online and find recordings. They're like high quality productions too. It's not like a quick gotcha on the phone. It's like we really staged, lighting, audio. We're showcasing our movements and our dances. Okay? Yet there was nothing in their hearts of the spiritual tastes. No trace appeared upon them of the withering brought about by servitude, nor the distinguishing mark of fear, nor the burning of divine love, nor a heart wholly gathered upon worship with sincere intention. One could perceive no fragrance of true seeking among them, nor hear from them the principles of spiritual journeying, sulūk, wayfaring, and wusul, arrival, nor of overcoming the obstacles of the nafs, nor of experiencing the spiritual tastes that arise from the first risings, the bawariq, the flashes, and the lawamih, the gleams. Neither the withering brought about by fear nor the distinguishing mark of divine love could be seen upon them, except perhaps during samā'. We already learned a lot about this spiritual audition. That's when their songs come out, and that's when they begin the dances, when they would at times become tender-hearted and humbled. But as soon as they left the samā', this Sufi audition, they returned to those same habits of the nafs and their customary conventions. Nevertheless, they were people of affection, mutual love, fellowship, compassion, noble character, and selflessness. Indeed, what was most apparent about them was their good character, cheerful disposition, and outward conformity to the religion. He continues and he says, among them were those who maintained a nightly wird, fasted regularly, and performed hajj. Indeed, for most of them, the pinnacle of their spiritual striving was to reside in the vicinity of Mecca. Whoever remained there for a year considered his journey in sulūk complete. Customs held sway over them, and their nufus, their inner selves, remained veiled from the realities. I didn't find among them a single discerning critic, nor a true seeker, nor anyone who ever pointed toward the pursuit of usul. This is arrival. That discipline had died out among them entirely. In their view, the faqir, meaning we're not talking about someone that's living in poverty like we would call a faqir, like a miskeen. Here the faqir is a person who has taken upon a life of al-faqr, which is a spiritual impoverishment in need of Allah. So he says, in their view, the faqir was simply one who spread a dining cloth, honored his brothers with hospitality, or opened the floor for a session of sama'ah, softening people's hearts so that he might then entertain them while they were in the state of tenderness. This was the noblest of their spiritual states and the highest they attained. Beyond that, there was nothing more. They held their sheikhs as in high regard, though not to the same extent as the former group. You remember in Wāsiṭ, the level of, I want to say beyond reverence. It's like, it's a mubalagha there. There's like a type of exaggeration. They had an exaggeration for their leaders. So these revered their mashayikh, but not quite to that level. Even so, there was a faction among them who would uncover their heads upon reaching the shrine of Ibn Idris in the desert and kiss the threshold of its entrance. I did this with them when I was a young man, although they did not fall into those same abominations. Right, we had many other things happen in Wāsiṭ we covered in great detail. At times, one of them would become infatuated with a beardless youth, despite knowing full well that such conduct was false and impermissible. Whenever they saw someone devoted to worship and wara', which is scrupulous piety, who would not banter with them, attend their gatherings of sama'ah, or find delight in them, they would say, "This man is dry and burdensome." Like when they would see a real faqir, they would go, "It's too dry. It's weighing on us to see this." They won't chit-chat and laugh. They won't sing with us. They won't dance with us. What's the problem, man? Come on. He said, I remained with him for a time, but their state did not please me. By the instinct Allah had placed within me, I knew that the reality lay beyond this, yet I found no breath of fresh air except in the books of the Sufis. And that's what happened in Baghdad among the fuqara. The Sufi books that he was reading were like Ihya by al-Ghazali, Risala Qushayriya, Qut al-Qulub. So if we look at this, some lessons that we can pull out from this here, we see that his search for knowledge, while it was very important for him to learn with the Shafi'i jurists, it didn't end there, because when he was with them, he felt that there was something essential missing. And so he continued searching for a community that had both knowledge as well as spiritual refinement or spiritual journeying. And that's what pushed him into the community of the fuqara. And as you can see, his first impression was overwhelmingly positive, right? Imam Wāsiṭī he's critiquing his journey, but he's being fair in that not everything was doom and gloom, right? He's highlighting the positives, even though he noted from the fuqaha, like the spiritual states are non-existent. It's pushing them into this type of behavior, but at the same time, the benefit cannot be denied. And now here, the same thing. Much better, 1,000 times he says, فَوَجَدْتُمْ خَيْرًا مِنْ أُولَٰئِكَ الْأَوَّلِينَ بِأَلْفِ طَبَقَةٍ. So that's a tremendous praise for their state in comparison to, however, Wāsiṭ, yeah. So I mean, it's like when you're way down here, It doesn't take a whole lot to get kind of far up the ladder. But he's saying, there's something inside of me that I know that there's much more to be had. The important observation here is that the Sufis, I think, as he says, were not isolated from the scholarly tradition in Baghdad, because they would deem what was impermissible haram and that which was permissible halal. And that was the problem in Wāsiṭ. So now he's saying, look, yuharrimun al-haram, right? They would very clearly follow a legal code. To the most part, they would follow their jurist. This is very different than what we had before when they rejected the jurist and they weren't very educated on what was halal and haram. So this was getting close to where he wanted to be. And this is my assumption, okay? And when you read more about Imam Wāsiṭī's his understanding of things, if you remember, he said, be wary of taking your religion from the people in the countryside. Right? You got to go into the cities, because that's where scholarship is. That's where you have an exchange of ideas. That's where you have a multitude of people all working towards a thing, and it pushes development and it encourages mastery. Out in the countryside, it's easy to kind of just go quiet, go dormant, and and then lose access. So basically, my assumption is that because of proximity to the fuqaha, there's a exchange that's happening. At least there's a culture that is dominant in the city region. That look, the majority of people know what's haram and halal, and so you can't get away with living otherwise. Especially if you're trying to get into certain circles, because that's what they wanted. They wanted to mingle within certain circles of society. So I believe the influence here is quite evident when it comes to their concern of the limits that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made things regarding lawful and unlawful. And then he also is impressed by their character. As he says, they're people of mutual affection, love, fellowship, companionship, compassion, good character, selflessness. These are all good qualities, of course, we're not going to deny. All these qualities are from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, from our religion. And he observes that there's genuine devotion among the people, as we noted, فِيهِمْ مَنْ لَهُ وِرْدٌ بِاللَّيْلِ وَصِيَامٌ وَحَجٌ. Right, so they had a wird. They maintained a regular night devotion. A wird, if you look at the great Imams of Tasawwuf, Imam Ghazali, if you look at Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, and he talks about al-awrad in his al-ghunya, the wird doesn't just mean adhkar. That's an essential part of it, but the wird, and they highlight points of time. There's awrad al-layl wa awrad al-nahar. So you have 5 awrad during the night, and then 5 or 6 during the daytime. And they're spans of time, like from Fajr until sunrise, and then sunrise until Dhuhr, and then after Dhuhr till Asr, then between Maghrib, Asr and Maghrib till Isha, then you're in the nighttime at Maghrib time. Then it switches over like that. And in each one of those awrad, you have things that should be done regularly. Abdul Qadir Jilani talks about specifics in al-ghunya, what it is that you're supposed to be doing, the types of adhkar that you should make, the types of prayers that you should make, the Quran that you should be reading, tafakkur wa tadabbur. Even if you're not going to read, you sit and you ponder, you sit in scholarly circles and learn, and then it goes on like that. Here's the prayers you make, how many rak'ah you make before dhuhr, how many after, etc., etc. If you pray ad-duha, what's that look like? What's the extent? What if you don't pray it? What should you do instead? And he goes on in some level of detail to spell a lot of that stuff out. And along the way, he's highlighting for us the various different narrations in support of those awrad and the various different hadith that also act as supporting evidence for the acts of both the day and the night. So here, we shouldn't understand purely that we're talking about a wird of dhikr. Okay? That is important. And there are those, because you'll note that a part of the paths of taṣawwuf, the turuq, if you will, you have a tariqah, for example, a qadiriyya, or you have a rifa'iyya, or a shadhuliyya, or you have a khalwatiyya. Like a lot of what you get with those pathways is an inheritance of the awrad. And normally that is the adhkar. And many times those adhkar, they develop. Okay? They're developed over time. And the adhkar are normally, what normally happens is, it becomes wird mujarrab. Okay? It's not like explicitly based in the Prophet's sunnah, in the number of things, like how many times you say subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu akbar. There are those things that are fixed. But then in Islam, we have an open command to make dhikr. Open command to remember Allah without restricting it. And so the great Sufi masters, they would develop certain awrad, dhikr, and they would take note of what happens with these awrad internally, among themselves and others. So now it becomes kind of like tested. It's not just, I think this will work. Now it becomes like, when you test things scientifically, you collect data points. And you say, these are the experiences that happened when this is done repeatedly and in multiple different people. They are beginning to experience certain things when you make dhikr in this way for this duration. And so they say, look, here's a wird that seems to work. They're not saying, this is the wird and the reward for it is set, because then you have to have an evidence. Or this is the wird number and the precise wording, and this is the only one that you can do. Now they're saying, look, we've tested these awrad, and this is generally what happens to people, the experience they get from them. So if you're looking to develop inwardly, then this just might crack the heart. It just might open it for you. And that's where these awrad typically come from. They're based in general command of remembering Allah, the general command from the Quran and the Prophet ﷺ, and then they begin to work and test. Okay? And you can see this from the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, is they would take the general concepts of worship, and then some of them would make their own ijtihad, and then they would go do something. Prayer, etc. And then that would be brought back to the Prophet ﷺ, and he would be perfectly fine with it. Bilal radiallahu anhu. And there's numerous different iterations of this, because there was nothing to restrict that. As long as it's from the same type, it's the same basic form of worship. Like, we're not going to invent another form of worship. We're going to take what's legislated and left open for us, and then we get to do. Right? It's open. Like, for example, we know that there's 5 obligatory prayers. We're not going to subtract and we're not going to add. Those are fixed. But then there are opportunities for you to pray more. It's open. Salat al-Layl, for example. Salat al-Layl, matna matna. You pray 2 by 2. And you can pray and pray and pray. And then there are times when prayer is prohibited. In the day, 3 times. Some might say 5 times, 3 basic times that the prayer is. So we're not going to pray during those times. But when those times lift, ala barakatillah. And then you have prophetic remembrances, as we know. Some of them are legislated immediately after prayer, after the adhan. There's a lot of different ad'iyah that you can make, types of du'as and stuff. Those are the prescribed sunan of the Prophet ﷺ. But then there's open adhkar. So when you're driving in your car, right, and you've said perhaps the recommended supplications of getting inside of the car, etc., can you just start saying, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah? Why not? Subhanallah, Subhanallah, Subhanallah. No number. Maybe you said, I'm going to say it 500 times. Between now and the time I get home, 1,000 times. 1,000 times. Where is that in the Sunnah? That number while you're on your vehicle? No. Not everything's like that. Has to be looked at from, is this rooted in our religion? And is the door open for us to exercise our own ijtihad? I should say our own juhd. That's a better way. Our own juhd with this. Meaning we're going to go for it. I'm going to sit and I'm going to make adhkar for an hour. Because I think that's what I need. I'm assessing myself. I've noticed I'm starting to veer off the track. I'm starting to go off in the wrong direction. I need to come back. My heart feels dead. What is dhikr to the heart? It's like water for the fish. It's life. So I need to enliven the heart. And I might need to hit it hard. Yeah. So that's typically where you get these awrad that are inherited from turuq al-Sufiyya. And you'll likely find, especially if it's, and we'll note from Imam al-Wāsiṭī rahimahullah ta'ala as he categorizes the shuyukh at-Tasawwuf, okay? The real shaykh who has knowledge of the sunnah may have a particular wird, but someone of that level is not going to say, this is the one and that's it. This is what works, and you can make it work for you. Insha'Allah, it will open something. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make something open with this. Otherwise, yeah, it's open like that. So that's what we should understand. It's kind of like a little sidebar with the concept of man lahu wirdun bil-layl wa siyamun wa hajjun, right? We have this wird at night, a wird of prayer perhaps, or dhikr or something, reading the Quran. Maybe they had a wird of reciting the Quran. That's certainly a wird min al-awrad. So when you take all these things together, you get these distinguishing qualities that marked them in a way which impacted Imam al-Wāsiṭī, because that was what was missing. It was a vacuum in Wāsiṭ. Remember, they didn't have awrad at night. They had sleeping around with the peoples, you know? Yeah. So here we can see the nature of his critique. And despite everything that impressed Imam Wāsiṭī by what he saw in Baghdad, especially among the fuqara, he also noted the traces of his earlier environment. There were traces of that, meaning that type of thing had not disappeared completely, as we note here. When it comes to the veneration or the reverence, excessive reverence of the mashayikh, he said that there was a group, فيهم شعبة منهم يكشفون رؤوسهم عند قبة ابن إدريس. So that shrine, they would remove their hats, ويقبلون عتبة بابه, and then they would kiss the threshold of the door. And that's a practice that continues to happen today. When you visit some of the shrines, there are people that still do that. Especially the shrine of Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. Right? You find that the shrine is a place of visitation, and we've already learned visiting the graves is permissible, encouraged in fact, and you could even travel to do so long as you're doing it in the proper way. And so you'll find, and again, you can go online and you can see this, because they're like showcasing how they honor and their practices of visitation, that they will bend down and kiss the threshold of the door before they enter where the actual site of burial is at. And so he's talking about this as an infraction in terms of the legislated manners of visiting the graves. He also says, as we noted here, among them there was a group, meaning it's just a small portion. We're not talking about the masses now practicing these things. So this is a very careful phrase. Imam al-Wāsiṭī is being restrained here, being fair, as opposed to just being also exaggerating blame. They're all messed up. It's all garbage. It's all ruined there. No, he's being fair, and he does the same thing with isolated incidents of the similar infatuation that took place in his previous community with young boys. He said this happened, but in this case, they knew very well that it was impermissible. So they're just living in sin based on the temptations in their own heart. And that is another manifestation of the diseases that they're not working to purify and to cure. So again, at times, he says, رُبَّمَا عَشِقَ أَحَدٌ مِّنْهُمْ أَمْرَدَ رُبَّمَا, and then أَحَدٌ مِّنْهُمْ. Perhaps one of them or two, like a rare off occasion. So we're like night and day in terms of what he's now experiencing. And this you can imagine because he's still young. He's a young man, and all he knew was Wāsiṭ and all that was happening. This must have been like a breath of fresh air. Doesn't last long, at least what he wants, the type of air that he wants to breathe. He is living in the world of Imam al-Ghazali. He's living in the world of Imam al-Qushayri, right? That's what he's living in. Those are the Sufi books. That's the idealistic Sufi environment that he's living in. So here it's a drastic improvement, however, not quite what he's feeling in his heart. The important part that we need to note here, like we noted with Baghdad and the fuqaha in their fixation with fiqh, and that was it. Here, there's this dominance of the outward forms of taṣawwuf. Okay? This is what many have called rasm as-Sufiyya, or taṣawwuf al-rasm. Al-rasm is like the image of a thing, without the spirit of the thing. And so he viewed this particular group in Baghdad to be of this particular type. Like they observed the outward symbols of the Sufi way. So if you think about the criticism, like the criticism is not directed at the clothing that they wore, right? They wore garments. They were traditionally associated with poverty, like wool garments. Right? That's some of the manners, right? Some of the manners of taṣawwuf is wearing moderate and modest clothing and taking into consideration like what's durable, what is affordable, what is ordinary. And then typically the fuqara, they would be so unconcerned with the ways of the world, they would mend holes and rips and repair. And so they would you would find them with patches. And when I was in Medina, I encountered this same kind of approach. It was a minority because, you know, Saudi is no different than the rest of the world in many ways. And I don't want to say opulence, but like the normal standards of clothing and dress and, you know, looking fresh, etc., which has its place, no doubt. But there were among that community, they called them al-ahbab. Ahbab. Yeah. Saudis. Mostly you think of ahbab in Yemen. But these were known as al-ahbab, like unofficial. I lived in the neighborhood. And you would find them like this. Some of them, you know, you could tell. You could see it's mended together. There's a rip that got mended together. They would mend the pocket a little bit if it got torn. You could tell the thobe was like, it was the older model for sure. It starts to get harder to clean off the like tinge of the desert the longer you wear a white thobe. And that's why many would stop wearing white. They would wear a darker color so that it wouldn't appear to be dirty. They wouldn't appear to be like dusty. Yeah, because white after a while in the desert, you could wash and wash and wash, it's just lost its shimmer. It's become kind of dull. Yeah. And after long enough, it starts to look a little bit gray. Yeah. So that was a tradition that continues until this day, and that particular community, I believe, were rather genuine. This wasn't a show, and that's what he's critiquing right here. He's critiquing this community adorning themselves in this way as a show. It became like an identity marker and no longer reflected the genuine spiritual attainment, if you will. So like wearing garments that are associated with poverty and asceticism, it's not inherently blameworthy. It becomes problematic when you're doing it to show off. And that's why he says they were people known for patch garments, patch cloaks, and finely made decorative patches. It's like decorative patches. Yeah. In another one of his works, Imam al-Wāsiṭī, he says, كل من تزايا عندهم بلبس المرقعة كان صوفيا أو فقيرا. Whoever dressed in the patched cloak among the people was regarded as a Sufi or one of the fuqarāʻ. So it's kind of like you put on the outfit, people will think you're that. They're not going to measure the reality of who you are. You just have the uniform on. Right? It's like, it happens today. Even if you wear the libs al-mashyakha, you're wearing the clothing of a shaykh, people will assume that you're a shaykh. And I also witnessed this in my time, traveling with groups for Umrah. And you know, some of the shabab, they get excited when they land in Medina and they see all of the dress. And they what they want to do is see the imams. They look at the imams leading the prayer and they see how they're dressed. And they think, like, out of love, they go to the shop and they buy the outfit. Right? They get on the ghutra and they get on the fresh thobe and they might have put on a bisht, and then they you know, when you put on a suit you get a little taller, you know what I mean? And so that was what happened. So that's the identity marker here that they were utilizing. And so this concern of his, Imam al-Wāsiṭī's concern, we can understand this when we compare it with the discussion found with Imam al-Ghazali in his Ihya, because he warns that distinctive religious clothing can gradually become a means of seeking status rather than a reflection of sincerity. And he explains that some people adopt rough and patched clothing so that others will regard them as detached from worldly life. Others seek a more subtle balance. They wear garments that preserve the appearance of poverty and piety while remaining refined enough to win acceptance among rulers, merchants, and the wealthy. In both cases, the concern shifts from cultivating the heart to maintaining a public image. So here, we're getting the other end of that spectrum. What he points out, Imam al-Ghazali points out, they wear the markers of a taṣawwuf, but they make sure they're good enough that they'll be accepted in wider society, especially the wealthy. So it can't just be a regular patch, it's got to be a little fine, decorative in nature. It's like, I've got the cloak on, it's just very tailored. It's very fitted. You know, like, it's not just one off the shelf. I went and had this custom made. And I told him, put a few of those patches on there too. And that way when I go sit with the rich, they won't be like, ew, like, what is this dirty guy? They'd be like, highbrow Sufi. Yeah, we can get on with that type because we can see, like, he likes the finer things. He's into the stuff. Yeah, and that was how they carried on. So Imam Wāsiṭ, he doesn't claim that every member, this is key, remember that not every member of the Sufis of Baghdad wore the same garments for those same motives. And he doesn't accuse them of showing off. But it is understood. And this is why Imam al-Ghazali's discussion helps us understand how a garment that originally symbolizes humility and renunciation of the world can gradually become a social identity marker that people will feel compelled to wear if they're after certain worldly ends. And once that happens, the attention naturally shifts towards appearance of the clothing itself. You start now worrying about what it looks like. So the patch cloak, it stays. The patch cloak is the marker. It stays in place, but now there's a devotion to craftsmanship. How does it look? Okay. Is it elegant enough? Is it expensive enough to be welcomed into the circles of the wealthy? So remember, Imam al-Wāsiṭī is reading al-Ghazali, so this is all very familiar to him. So when he sees this, he knows what's happening. This is what he's reading, and so now he's seeing it in real life play out. So it's obviously not a new phenomena that's happening in Baghdad. It's not like they just started this. Imam al-Ghazali has already discussed this and talked about the reality that must have been quite prevalent even during his time. So this helps us understand, you know, not only the perspective of Imam Wāsiṭī, but we can understand his formation as a scholar. Right? This isn't an original idea of his. It's just one that he is now seeing firsthand and can truly appreciate the great wisdom of the great Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala. And this is basically what happens. They become attached to the wealthy. And when you become attached to the wealthy, you begin to lose spiritual independence. He continues observing what happens there, and he says he came to believe that the problem, it extended beyond the outward appearance, and now was something that was occupying their hearts, an ambition of sorts. As he notes in his rihla here when he says the primary concern, he says غَالِبُ هِمَمِهِمْ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ. When it comes to the worldly pleasures like طَيِّبِ الطَّعَامِ وَحُسْنُ اللِّبَاسِ, they want good food, elegant clothing. They want well-tailored hindam thiyab. They want well-tailored garments. And then they want to have company with the wealthy, cultivating their friendship, socializing freely with them, showing them excessive deference. They're deferring to the wealthy. And this is how the wealthy can take advantage of this class. this class is not going to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. They're going to take the direction like, is this topic okay? Or let's just joke about it. Because I don't want to lose favor with you, because what I want from you is I want your generosity. It's basically what they're after. I want your generosity, meaning I want you to fund the zawiyah or whatever they're doing. Their program needs to be funded. And this is such a difficult thing to navigate through. It's very difficult to navigate through this. And it gets worse when the faqir takes advantage of those that are lower than him. They're being taken advantage of by the rich. And then in turn, some of them will take advantage of the even poorer, not the spiritually poor, but the actual poor living in poverty who are now looking for help. And they'll go to these identified Sufis and they will, whatever little they have, they'll end up getting pillaged for whatever they have in order to get some prayers written down for them for whatever thing that's ailing them or bothering them. And so then they begin to, some of these, they're like charlatans, right? And they will not only take advantage of people, but it will become their entire program. They will feed on those that are desperate in so many different ways. So here, if we take, for example, the great Al-Baz al-Ashhab, rahimahullah, Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, he advises, he says, as for keeping the company of the wealthy, so he has Abdul Qadir al-Jilani's way was notably very balanced, in that it was not one of like, you just leave everything and you go off into a cave. A part of his path was dealing with the world and the responsibilities, right? And you note that he had a family and he had children and so on and so forth. So he says, as for keeping the company of the wealthy, you have to maintain dignity before them. Do not desire what they possess. Cut off all hope in what is in their hands. Remove every trace of them from your heart and protect your religion from becoming weakened out of hope for what they may give you. He says, seek refuge in Allah from any action that diminishes your religion and from the company of people through whom religion is gradually stripped away, its bonds unraveled, and the light of faith extinguished by the radiance of their wealth and the glitter of their worldly life. The proper conduct of the poor seeker, the faqir, is to remove the wealthy from his heart, so that his heart is empty of both the wealthy and their possessions. Indeed, it should be emptied of both this world and the next. He should not allow anything to take up residence in his heart or gain entry into it. Rather, he should purify himself of all such attachments until his heart is completely free of them. Then he waits for it to be filled with his Lord Azza wa Jal. At that point, nothing besides Allah remains present in his heart, and he recognizes that there is no power and no strength except through Allah. Then the grace of Allah comes to him, and through Allah alone he attains true richness without toil and without anxiety. Basically, the problem, it's not interacting with wealthy people. The problem is becoming inwardly dependent and hopeful for what they possess. And then that leads to you compromising your religion. And so he writes extensively about the measure of a true spiritual guide. And he says that among the conditions of the shaykh, al-fuqarāʻ, This is min shurut Shaykh al-Fuqara. Remember last time we talked about aqsam shuyukh al-ilm. Aqsam Shaykh al-ilm. So here he has conditions for the Shaykh al-Fuqara. He says that he does not visit rulers or oppressive authorities in order to obtain their charity or favors, nor should he eat from their food. For if a body is nourished by what is unlawful, then the fire has greater claim to it. Right, so I won't comment much on that and the reality in which we live. He goes on and he says, repeating this portion here, for if a body is nourished by what is unlawful, meaning what is impermissible, and they would often scrutinize the ruling class for this by how they got their wealth. And now they're feeding you with that or paying you with that. Like, this was where the ascetics, they would turn away from taking stipends. Many of the great imams refused even a stipend to occupy a position because they were worried that it was tainted wealth. And they didn't want to consume that. Because فَأَنَّا يُسْتَجَابُ لِذَلِكَ. How are they going to be answered, their prayers? The consequences. Can't say anything. That's the problem. Once you start becoming indebted and those rulers ingratiate themselves, and now you're on the payroll, and now you're being fed, then how are you going to enjoin the good and forbid the evil? How will you speak out when you've received millions of dollars? Like, we paid you. Like, yeah, you've gotten used to the lifestyle now, right? You've grown used to and accustomed to the lifestyle, the cars, the homes, all the stuff, the trips, everything. You've gotten used to that. And when you get used to that, it's now hard to do without. So now there's a lever that can be pulled. Yeah. Multi-faceted situation. So basically, here he's highlighting, this is the Imam al-Wāsiṭī in his Mizan al-Shuyūkh, that seeking favor from the rulers, it represents an even more serious form of dependence than attachment to wealthy patrons in general. Because the ruler now wields authority and power. So when you become indebted to them, now you're not only subject to withdrawal of material support, but now you're subject to an exercise of that power. And that's why you look at these manuals that Imam al-Wāsiṭī is accustomed to reading now, these manuals of spiritual discipline. Repeatedly they're mentioning a warning about becoming too close and connected to political authority. And Imam al-Ghazali makes a very similar point in regards to how dangerous it is to allow yourself into those circles. Most dangerous of all is voluntarily entertaining them. Those circles where worldly ambition and pursuit of favor can gradually compromise your religion and your integrity. So up to this point, we see Imam al-Wāsiṭī is basically no longer criticizing isolated actions. We're not talking about reverence of shuyukh, and we're not talking about the amrad, the young boys. Now we're talking about what's prevalent in their groups. This is where he found the biggest bone to pick, is what they were doing and what they were after. And then of course they had their issues, like what they understood the spiritual path to be. Remember, he said that the highest spiritual path for them was as they note, the true faqir was one who spread out a meal for others, honored his brothers with hospitality, and opened the spiritual states of the listeners through sama'. He would host, if you will, events for singing. That's what they considered the pinnacle. In their eyes, he says, this was the highest and noble of spiritual states. And beyond this, the journey went no further. Again, we're stuck on very topical things. It's all about what's happening outside and not much about what's happening inside. So like, hospitality is a virtue. Ikram, al-layf, wal-jar, etc. Those are all virtues in Islam. But by itself, it doesn't constitute usul, arrival. Right? Ikram, al-layf, wal-jar, etc. is a manifestation of a pure heart. It's not the pure heart. Like when it's done sincerely, it's a manifestation of a healthy heart. That you want to be generous and you want to host and you want to honor others. It means the heart is not filled with jealousy and malice and hatred. But you have to get to the point where the heart's been purified enough that now will come out. Okay? Basically, the point is that the outward acts are not the end of the journey. Those are the manifestations. Those are the outcomes of the journey. So essentially, another point I should say is, when he talks about the dancing, we've already kind of alluded to the very orchestrated nature of their dancing, with the musical rhythms going and them stepping and shooting up straight, going down in the bowing position, and so on and so forth. These are much more organized events than they were in Wāsiṭ. Again, this is when they found softness, when they would listen to the songs. And sometimes, I know that's a part of our world, right? Sometimes people listen to the nasheeds and the religious songs and they feel soft and they feel moved by it. But then when they listen to the Quran, there's a different response. So I have to listen to the nasheeds every once in a while because it moves the heart and makes me feel alive with faith. It doesn't happen with the Quran as much for some reason. And we've talked about that. Imam Wāsiṭ went into this in quite detail. Yeah, that the songs, the voice and the rhythm, it appeals to the nafs. So while you think you're having a spiritual delight, you're actually having a nafsi experience of joy. You're moving to it. It's got the body going. And that nafsi thing responds quickly. The delight of the nafs happens quickly. Like with food, it's a delight of the nafs that happens right away. Yes, you have those things. That's what they talk about today. There's dopamine and there's all the types of chemical reactions, so on and so forth. Those things are all a part of the process. However, the nafs is inclined to these types of quick fixes. The immediate gratification is what the nafs is all about. And those songs are immediately gratifying. Right? And so the heart has to be able to calm down. You have to be able to relax. And you have to be able to endure. It's like delayed gratification is the ultimate gratification. And in Islam, that's a huge part of our religion, is delayed gratification. We're working for tomorrow. We're not living for today. So, live your best life now is not our program. Sacrifice now for a better tomorrow. Build your hereafter, even if it means destroying your world. Do not destroy your hereafter while building your world. And if Allah blesses you to do both, while you're building your hereafter, Allah gives you the world, alhamdulillah, you take it and you just use it for the best possible way. And then at the end, remember, he says about living near Mecca, etc. Again, another outward act of devotion. It's certainly virtuous to live there near or in the sanctuary, no doubt whatsoever. And of course, there's a lot that can be said. One of the main points that he mentions here is that highlighting this reality in his rihla, that you would not hear from them the principles of spiritual wayfaring, the path of arriving with Allah, how to overcome the obstacles of the lower self. So they weren't trained in this. They didn't have a real guide to help them get through this. And this is what the Mizan al-Shuyukh of Imam Wāsiṭ, where it really shines, is that he highlights a number of foundational requirements for the Shaykh al-Fuqara. The first, and it's very detailed what he says, but because we're out of time, I'm just going to give kind of like a high level idea. The first one is taqwa. Okay, and he has taqwa, وهو معنى عام في كل قول وفعل وخاطر. Right? Having taqwa in a general way, in what you do and what you say and what you even think. That you have this level of taqwa. The next pillar, he says, has to do with من أركان الطريق بعد تحقيق التقوى يكون الشيخ المذكور قد حقق الزهد. Right? To realize zuhud fi dunya. So that he's now freed his heart from coveting the worldly possessions. Remember, they had this problem. Then he adds another condition. He says, أن يكون متعففا. The spiritual guide has to be self-restrained, never coveting the gifts of others. And that's why they were going to the rich. They were going to the rich so that they could get the gifts. They wanted to receive the generosity of the rich. And so in order to get that generosity, they had to also placate them. And then the last one, I think we could say, أن يكون قلبه متصلا بالله تعالى. That their heart is always connected to Allah. He says, وَأَنفَاسُهُ مَحْفُوظَةً مَعَ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. Every breath that they take is preserved in the conscious awareness of Allah Azza wa Jal. So that gives you, remember, Mizan al-Shuyukh was written later on in his life, the last decade of his life or so. So after witnessing all of the various different stops along his journey and seeing the various iterations of the scholarly class or the spiritual class or those in between, he was able to, after having completed that journey, go back and not only identify the pitfalls, but then show us what the ideal leader of those communities looked like. And the reason you have to have an identifiable leader, a part of the Shaykh al-Fuqara is somebody who can teach another how to arrive and connect to Allah. And you cannot teach what you do not know yourself. Indeed. Indeed it was. A lived experience. That's all the time we have for this evening. Jazakallah khair for your attendance and attentive listening. Until next time, wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.